Hey, what's going on everybody? Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to have ourselves a little bit more discussion about DC20, and specifically we're going to talk about their action point system and what you can do, what you can't do, pros, cons, all that good stuff. Let's get into it. So to help introduce the action point system for those of you that are uninitiated, it's basically a system in which you get action points, in this case 4, and you can allocate those action points on your turn to do different things. So to use Dungeons and Dragons as the example, they don't use an action point system, rather you get like your movement, your bonus action, and your action, and those things can be used for very specific things, which has advantages in simplicity, but I think overall loses in terms of its ability to allow you to be creative on your turn, and a lot of times you end up with floating resources and things like that. And also, to jump to that real quick, what I mean by floating resources is just something that you wasted, because sometimes you're not going to have a bonus action to use, and then you're stuck there knowing that you had this thing that you could have used, but you can't because your class or character or whatever doesn't allow for it. And that's just unfortunate. Now, the more comparable of some of the bigger tabletop role-playing games is going to be Pathfinder, and Pathfinder uses a 3-point action system, but there's a few things in particular that I think make DC20's system a little bit of a better action point system than Pathfinder's. Now, as I explain this, obviously I am fully aware that this is a subjective topic. There's not an objective better thing. I understand this, okay? That being said, I do think there's a lot of reasons that this would be better, and one of the biggest ones being that it's just way more simplistic, where it leans more to that D&D side of the simplicity side of things, rather than Pathfinder's. And one of the biggest reasons for that is the fact that certain things in Pathfinder will take up multiple action points, which is not like a bad thing to do, but it's really nice, because in DC20, whenever you're going to do something like cast a spell, you're just going to use an action point for that. It's very simple. There's not going to be like certain special actions that cost 2 action points or 3 action points. Now, something you can do is you can cast that spell for 1 action point and then spend an action point to enhance that spell in some way. So you are still spending more than 1 action point on that thing, but it gives you the kind of, flexibility to spend your action points as deemed, whereas in something like Pathfinder, if you have this really cool ability thing you want to do, it might still just rip your whole turn, which, is probably fair in the sense of what the power that it does and the scale that it does it at. But in something like DC20, again, you can have that super crazy powerful 6 spell. It's just going to take a lot of your action points, but you get to decide that. You're not just locked into like, oh, you want to do this cool thing? 2 action points ripped away. So just kind of I think one of the bigger differences between the two that I find to be a little easier to understand, a little easier to teach, and just a little more fun when playing the game. So, I'm done with comparisons. We're just going to talk about DC20 now. And DC20, for their action point system, like I mentioned before, you get 4 action points on your turn, and you get 1 minor action point. Your minor action point, the idea of that is so you're not having to burn an action point for something like opening a door, right? Something that could simply be done without taking up part of your turn. There are some things listed in the rulebook that qualify as these minor actions. At the end of the day, it's kind of up to the DM's discretion to be like, yeah, that covers under your minor action point. An important note to these is that they are used for everything, right? So in terms of doing the help action, the attack action, your movement, all of these things on your turn, you use one of these points to do. And that is one kind of really nice thing about the system, is the flexibility that these allow you. I'm not going to get into that rant yet, that's for later. Once you use up these actions, your turn will be over when it comes to your turn, and they will refresh at the end of your turn. That refreshing at the end of your turn is important because reactions actually also take up one of your action points. So if you're sitting there wondering, yeah, you can take 4 attacks of opportunity. However, in doing so, you're not going to have a turn because you will have used all of your actions up. So it's kind of a cool way to decide like, oh, do I want to be reactionary and maybe really use my action points to help someone on their turn or in the midst of combat, right, mid-initiative order? Or do I want to wait for my turn to come up and be able to do a bigger, larger thing maybe with more action points, whether that be more movement, harder hits, things of that nature. That's kind of the basics of this, and now we're going to talk about what all of the options are with these actions. Now, I'm going to start listing things off here, and I'm not going to go super in-depth into each of these actions, because a lot of them, if you've played any tabletop role-playing game before, you're going to know what they are, okay? So, things that take up your action points, right? We have attacking and casting spells, obviously, disarming someone, grappling someone, shoving someone, tackling, disengaging, dodging. Both of those have some cool mechanics we're going to talk about here in a little bit. Hiding, moving, using the help action, using objects, so things like potions, right? Potion's not a minor action, actually drinking the potion. And then finally, the last thing I want to mention are skill actions. Now, these I'm not going to list every single one, because if you go through the book, which I will show here, panning down on the screen, there's a lot of them, okay? There's quite a few skill actions to go through. But some examples, you have things like Analyze Creature, Calm Animal, Combat Insight, Conceal, Feint, Intimidate, and a lot more. Basically, these are things that will let you do more skill checky things while in combat, which is fun, because when you build a character to be really good at things like Trickery, which is one of the skills in this game, right? It allows you mid-combat to use that trickery to do cool, unique things, whether that be giving characters disadvantage or things of that nature. So it lets you use your skills in combat, so then those, kind of skill junkie players don't feel like they're just super losing out when it comes to combat, because that can be a big negative. Now, the biggest thing I want to address, because I have had some people in a comment section talk about it, but not really 100% understand it, and that's okay. That's okay. We're all learning. When it comes to attacking, especially, yes, to be clear, you can attack 4 times in one turn. At level 1, straight up. However, it's not as broken as it sounds, okay? Because when you attack, you gain something called stacking disadvantage. So in this system, it's not just you can only have 1 disadvantage or 1 advantage. They can stack. And so for something like attacking 4 times, your first attack will be normal. It'll be a basic attack, roll a d20, see if you hit, great. Second attack in the turn, it's going to be rolling a d20 at disadvantage. So roll 2 d20s, take the lowest. Pretty straightforward. However, once you get to that third attack is when it gets really silly, because then you go to triple disadvantage. So at that point, yes, you are rolling 3 d20s and then taking the lowest of all 3 of these dice. And finally, hey, you guessed it, at your 4th attack, if you just go for 4 swings of your sword in your turn, you're rolling at quadruple disadvantage. So you are rolling 4 times, I'd count them up, baby, 4 d20s, and then taking the lowest of those 4 d20s. So attacking 4 times in a turn is not only not optimal if you're a min-maxer, like if that's not obvious, but the other big thing is there's just so many, cooler ways to use your turn, right? Now, one thing you can do, and people have talked about how, basically the ideal way to take a basic marshal's turn would be you can attack, you can use an action point to gain advantage on that attack, you can then attack a second time, and then use an action point to inherently gain advantage but cancel out that disadvantage. So you're getting 1 attack at advantage and 1 normal attack. That's probably a pretty basic turn. There's a lot of other really cool skill abilities, like I was mentioning earlier, that you can use that will probably prove to be more useful in certain situations. However, you can do that. So just to explain that system, so we're all on the same page here. Now, to explain what I think is one of the cooler mechanics in this action point system is the disengage and dodge actions, because you can take half and full versions of these actions. Now, what that is if you spend 1 action point to disengage, you will give disadvantage to any attacks of opportunity, right? That's pretty sweet. We like that. However, if you're willing to burn 2 action points on it, you can basically take the disengage action again and get a stronger variant of it. Again, following that same rule that I talked about with spells, where you can use 1 to just cast the spell, but you can do another thing to enhance that spell, right? So same thing here with the disengage action. You'll notice a lot of these rules combine. So once you learn one part of the rules, the others just fit together. So for disengage, whenever you use 2 action points, you completely negate attacks of opportunity. So you can use 2 action points to full disengage and then have 2 things of movement and take 0 attacks of opportunity. Pretty sweet. And then for dodge, it's a very similar situation where if you use 1 action point, you will basically give the next check against you, whether that's a spell attack or a regular attack, disadvantage. However, if you want to use 2 action points, again, you can take a full dodge. And in taking a full dodge, enhancing this dodge, right, we give disadvantage to all attacks and things like that coming our way. So again, something to think about on your Marshal's turn, and I'm using Marshals because they're the easiest example here, is you can swing once with advantage and then take a full dodge turn rather than swinging a second time, and you now are going to give disadvantage to everything around you after taking your attack, right? If there's a swarm of enemies around you, that might be your best option. So just, things to think about. But again, I think Disengage and Dodge system are very cool because, again, it just gives you the flexibility on your turn to be able to make a choice of, man, like, I really need to get away from this person, but I really also need these 3 action points to do something cool later, or maybe these 2 rather, so I'm only going to spend 1 to give this attack of opportunity disadvantage, lowering, the likelihood of it hitting, then I'll move away, then I have 2, rather than using the full 1, which would only leave me with 1 action afterward, right? You can make decisions depending on what the scenario is, just the creative freedom is so good. And now another action that maybe y'all are curious about is the help action. Now, because you have 4 actions, some of you, bright-witted min-maxers might be thinking, well, dang, if I just give everybody the help action, all my team's gonna have advantage every turn? This is insane. Help does not work the same way in DC20 as it does in D&D because you're way more freed up on your turn to be able to help somebody and then also take most of your normal turn. So because of that, the help action provides whatever teammate you're helping a D8 on whatever that check is, right? So if you're helping them attack, they add a D8 to whatever that next attack roll is, right? Pretty straightforward. Now, just like attacking, there is a stacking disadvantage to this help thing. Oh, look at that. We got more connecting rules, right? So when you give a D8 to a teammate, if you want to help again, you then give a D6. If you want to help again, you then give a D4, right? So you have this stacking disadvantage on your help action. So you can't walk over to every single one of your teammates in a turn and all of a sudden everybody has advantage on their checks and you're all just swinging like crazy. No, not quite. It instead is just adding that die, and that die gets lessened each time you do the help action, which also just makes sense roleplay-wise, right? Like, if you're going up and helping someone do this thing, and then within that same turn, you're going and helping someone else, you're going to be a lot less useful because you've had to spend time and energy helping that first person within your turn. So the help action is very cool. It's very sweet. And then again, it's just logical, right? Because you have the stacking disadvantage mechanic that you already learned about. So again, kind of helping with that ease of teaching. And another thing to acknowledge is that when it comes to helping with skill checks, the way it is in the rulebook is that you cannot help with a skill unless you actually have at least 1 mastery in that skill, which is kind of this game's version of proficiency. That's the best way I can compare it. And that's just a good system, right? And it even talks about, it's up to the DM's discretion. Your character might for some reason have knowledge that would be able to help in this situation. But as rules are written, your person has to have an understanding of how to help in this situation, which I think is good because a lot of times in D&D, right, you'll have your one person that's really, really good at, let's say, crafting armor, right? And you want to give them advantage on the check, so you go up and go, oh, well, I'm going to assist them in crafting this armor, so therefore they get advantage. And it's like, well, how does that make... Bro, you ain't never crafted armor a day in your life. Why do you think you just get to give advantage all of a sudden? So it helps alleviate some of that kind of silliness of just shoving advantage onto the players with good checks for whatever that specific situation you're in is. I think it also helps give kind of some reason and some okayness to having the party help each other and like cross over in terms of having the same proficiencies or skill masteries in this case. Because in D&D, when 2 people are really, really good at survival checks, right? And you're trying to set up camp. Well, typically, one person's going to help someone set up the camp, so then that person that has the plus whatever in survival is just kind of wasted. It just doesn't feel great. Some DMs will counteract this by letting multiple people take checks and things like that. But at the end of the day, it just doesn't feel great, right? Because it's like, well, we're both good at the same thing. But in this system, it is beneficial to have multiple people good at the same thing. So just something to keep in mind, all regarding that help action. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about before I get into my final thoughts and my final little rant are held actions. Because yes, you can do held actions in this system, right? It's a 4-point action system. It's, it's a little more complex, I guess. This is one of the things where you kind of have to think about a little harder than D&D where you just hold your action, right? But in this system, you basically have to declare what action you are holding, and this can be sort of multiple actions. So you can hold your movement and then attack as long as it's a logical one-step thing, right? You can't like, oh, I'm holding 4 different attacks and I'm going to use them all. No, that's not quite how this works, right? But let's say you hold, like, as soon as someone crosses this doorway, I'm going to run up and hit them. So then you spend your 2 action points on your turn for running up and hitting them. And then you have your trigger set, right? So you have to declare whatever that trigger is. It's very similar to regular reactions, right? Now, once that trigger hits, you can then choose if you want to take that action or not. Now, you did have to spend the actions on your previous turn in order to set up for this thing, so the action's already spent. But if that action requires you spending a different resource, so something we're going to talk about in a future video, right? You know, there's a mana system in this, no more spell slots. Great change. We'll get into that later. And then martial classes have a thing called stamina, which is inherently their version of mana. If you are doing something that would inherently expend one of these resources, if you choose not to do this held action, it does not spend those resources. Those mana, those stamina points don't get spent until you actually do the reaction. So it's kind of nice in that way of you do have to waste the actions preparing yourself to do it, but you don't have to burn through those limited resources that might reset on, like, you know, a rest or whatever the case may be. So something to kind of think about with held actions, which I really appreciate because it makes you spend your on-turn resources, but it doesn't make you expend those ones that you'd have to wait for them to recharge, because that would inherently just feel bad. So there it is, kind of pretty good layout overview of this 4 action point system. Now, final thoughts. First off, I want to say I love this 4-point action point system, all right? This 4-point action point system, which I will redub at some other point because that's a lot to say. It's a mouthful. The biggest thing is it just allows for a very open-ended use of your turn, right? The creative possibilities with this 4-point system is way higher than like movement, bonus action, action. And the biggest problem with those, at least in my opinion, is that you tend to just fall into the routine of you're just going to be doing the same thing most turns. Maybe as a spellcaster, that's not always true because your spell slots limit you. But in terms of like a martial class, you just run up and hit and sometimes use a bonus action for something. And that's another thing, right? Is those bonus actions and things like that a lot of times turn into just these floating resources that you don't fully use up. So it just kind of feels bad, right? Like ending your turn with a thing that you know you like could have used in a different circumstance, but you can't use it in this circumstance. It just doesn't feel good. It's just never a happy feeling in combat when you feel like you're losing opportunity and things like that. And then the other couple things that I really like is, one is you're not, you know, like I said, tied to doing the same turn over and over, but it allows you to have more of those niche things and feel good about it. For a lot of people that play these TTRPGs, I say a lot, but more so the min-maxers, they're gonna pick very specific spells and very specific things that will help them most of the time in combat. And it doesn't give you a whole lot of room for freedom for those niche use case things. Because also, if you are to use these niche use case things, it takes up your entire turn, and that just doesn't feel great. Your whole action is gone. Whereas now, these kind of niche abilities and things will only take up a single action point. So you can try to use this niche thing, and then use the rest of your turn for a pretty, like, okay, this will probably work most of the time. A big bonus. And finally, the biggest thing that I actually appreciate, and this comes from someone who is known for getting bad rolls, and that is the ability to secure your ability to do something. All right, that was worded very weirdly, but what I mean is if the big bad is at 2 health points, and you know that all you need to do is hit this big bad, and you've done it, you've won, you don't just use your action to swing and hope that your D20 hits. That doesn't feel great. But instead, you can take your turn and you can role play this intense feeling of your character really like honing in and just recognizing the situation of, wow, like this is it, this is his moment to save the world. And you can spend your whole turn like attacking and gaining like multiple advantage on this one attack, which in most of your average turns wouldn't be a very good use of your turn, right? It'd be kind of a waste of your turn to really throw it all into a singular attack in most cases. But in this one case, you can roleplay that super hype moment and your character really going for it, and then the likelihood of you failing is hyper low. Okay, now, to be clear, I'll find a way. Okay, you can still fail that roll, but then at that point, it's also like, even funnier because it's like, how did you manage to fail a roll with that much advantage? You know what I mean? So anyway, just kind of my final thoughts for the system, things that I really like about it. Comment down below, let me know what you think. If you think the 4-point action point system is bad, tell me why. I would love to hear your thoughts. I would love to have some like discourse about it, right? Obviously, no system's perfect at the end of the day. And I think the biggest flaw of this system, because I will end being honest, is I can definitely see the system giving some people really bad choice paralysis or analysis paralysis, if that's what you want to call it, which if you don't know, is basically having too many options. And with all of those options, it's like, oh, I don't know what to do. Like the possibilities are endless, right? And I can see that getting some players. I can see that being a problem. However, I do think the positives outweigh that big negative, even though it can be an issue for some people. And if that is an issue for you, that's okay. At the end of the day with this system, you can still just kind of create your basic flowchart of a turn and go with it. You don't have to use the system to be super creative. It just allows you to. But anyway, nonetheless, I'm gonna stop rambling, stop ranting. I hope y'all enjoyed the video. If you liked it, please be sure to subscribe down below. We're gonna have more DC20 content, and I will see you all on the next one. Peace out.